you are sabotaging your English learning journey. Today, I'm going to expose 5 massive mistakes that you are most likely making that are holding you back from reaching your full English speaking potential. But don't worry, because I'll also give you tips for how you can fix all of these mistakes so that you can improve your English language proficiency. But first, allow me to quickly introduce myself. I'm Cami the English Coach, owner and founder of Cami's English Corner, and I have over 10 years of experience teaching English to students all around the world. As a TOEFL certified American English teacher, I specialize in helping busy English learners improve their English daily conversation skills and vocabulary, perfect their American English pronunciation, correct their writing, along with helping students prepare for the TOEFL English exam. With all this teaching experience under my belt, I have observed so many study habits that consistently lead to students not being able to improve their English. But I have also seen a lot of things that always help students excel. So before we dive into the things that are holding you back from reaching your English proficiency potential, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content just like this, and hit that bell icon so that you can get notified when I post a video every week to help you along your English learning journey. So the first thing that you're doing that's holding you back from your English proficiency potential is that you're probably burning yourself out. So many people will create or follow really strict English study schedules because maybe they think it's the best or most optimal way to study English, or because they saw someone do it online. But that's not going to be useful for you if you end up working too hard and burning yourself out. Because when you create so much stress for yourself, what are you going to do? You'll quit. Not only that, you're going to end up building up negative associations with English, which is not good for your mental health and well-being. So what should you do instead? Well, you need to create a study regimen that you can easily implement into your daily routine. While it's obviously advantageous to have some dedicated study time throughout the week, you should also find ways to integrate passive studying into your daily routine. So, for instance, you could listen to podcasts or audiobooks while you're cooking and cleaning or walking your dog. Watch English content on Netflix or YouTube. Read English books at night instead of scrolling on Instagram and TikTok. There are so many different ways that you can study without feeling like you're studying. I also highly recommend integrating different subjects together when you do have your dedicated study time. By combining different subjects together, like working on vocabulary and grammar together, or one of my favorite things is doing vocabulary, grammar, and writing all together, you're going to save a bunch of time. Therefore, you won't have to study for as long, and you'll be less likely to burn yourself out. So that leads me to my next point. Your study methods are not actually intuitive. They're not helpful for real language acquisition. Let's go back to childhood and think about when you learned your native language as a wee little baby. Did you study textbooks as a toddler when you were trying to learn vocabulary? No, probably not. Did your parents make you sit with grammar books so that you could learn how to use past tense in your own native language? No, you did not. Well, you probably didn't. What most likely happened was once you entered school, your teacher combined different skills together into singular assignments. So when your teacher taught you new vocabulary, you had to write a story with it. There you go, vocab and writing together. If you had to learn different grammar rules, you had to write sentences with them. Grammar and writing together. Most likely, you also had to incorporate your new vocabulary that you learned in class. As you're studying English, if you only look at grammar rules and examples, that's not going to help you with applying your grammar. And what's the use of studying something if you aren't going to apply it? And the same thing goes with vocabulary. If you only study words and definitions, how are you going to practice using them in a sentence? It's a waste of your time. So what can you do? Well, like I said before, combine them. Integrate as many subjects together to create a more comprehensive learning experience. And I know a lot of students don't want to hear this, but one of the best ways you can do this is by incorporating writing into your English practice, because writing allows you to slow down a little bit and be more mindful about what vocabulary and grammar you're using, while also giving you the opportunity to go back and review your work. So here's an example of what you could do to combine all your English skills together into one study session. So the first thing would be to maybe listen to a podcast or audiobook or watch your favorite show. And if you must use subtitles, make sure you're using English subtitles. While you're watching the show, make sure to write down any new vocabulary that you hear. Then after you're done listening or watching, look up the definitions of those vocabulary words and read a few example sentences that incorporate those vocabulary words. And the last part of this little comprehensive study session would be to write a summary. But what about grammar and speaking practice? Well, as you continue to do these summary practices, you can write the summaries from different perspectives, therefore using different grammar and tenses. So maybe the first summary that you write would be from the perspective of you telling your friend about the show that you watched. So you would write in past tense. Then you can try writing from the character's perspective, as though you are in the show at that moment, and you can use present tense. And then you can also write a paragraph about your future predictions to practice using future tense. And for your speaking practice, read it out loud. Or going back to the beginning when you were listening to the podcast or watching the show, you could also use that as an opportunity to do mirroring pronunciation practice. There are so many ways that you can integrate all of these subjects together. But if you don't want to think about how to structure this kind of comprehensive practice on your own, definitely check out my study session series where we go through the whole integrated comprehensive study process together. So, along the topic of watching shows, you're probably watching the wrong kinds of shows or series. A little side note about the word series. Native English speakers, or at least those of us in the United States, don't really use the term series when we talk about things that we're watching on TV or a streaming platform. We just call everything a show. The only exception would be if we're watching the news. That's just called the news. So if someone asks you what show are you watching these days, they're referring to whatever series you may be following along with. So there are 3 big mistakes that I see my students make when it comes to watching shows. The first mistake is they're watching shows that are outdated. Now, this could be outdated in 2 different ways. One, the show takes place in the past, and so their slang is different. A good example of this is the show Stranger Things. It was filmed recently, but it takes place in the 80s. So the idioms and slang that they use are not used anymore. Another example would be medieval era shows, such as Game of Thrones. A lot of the vocab that they use in those kinds of shows are never used in daily conversation. However, you might come across them in literature. Another kind of show that's outdated is shows or movies that were just filmed a very long time ago. I'm sorry to say this, but the show Friends is becoming kind of outdated. Sorry. The second mistake that a lot of my students make when choosing shows, this is going to ruffle a lot of feathers, is relying on watching K-dramas with English subtitles. This is not going to help you improve your English. While maybe it's good to have a bit of English reading practice, it is not a good way to practice your English. The same thing goes if you're translating K-pop lyrics to English. It just is not adequate. So there's a few issues with relying on K-dramas for English practice. So the first issue is the subtitles are frequently grammatically incorrect, or they might have some spelling mistakes or something, especially if you're watching K-dramas on platforms other than Netflix. So that's not conducive to your learning experience at all. The second issue is that the vocabulary that's used in K-dramas isn't really suitable for English conversation. The way that they describe characters' physical appearances or their personalities culturally doesn't actually translate well to English. For example, I see the word lovely thrown around as a description all the time in K-dramas, and lovely is not a word that's used to describe people that often in English. But in K-dramas, everyone is lovely. Another issue that you probably don't realize is you're still listening to them, even if you're not paying attention to the specific words. And every language has their own different kind of emphasis and intonation. So if you're listening to how they emphasize certain words or how their intonation changes throughout a sentence, that's going to negatively impact how your emphasis and intonation will be with English. This actually happened to me when I was living in South Korea. I didn't notice that my intonation and emphasis had changed with certain words and phrases until I went home and visited my family back in the United States. And everyone in my family was like, "Cami, why are you speaking like that? You sound really weird." So you gotta be careful. Yes, watch your K-dramas, but watch them separately from English. Now, this third mistake is in regards to students that are trying to hone in and perfect a certain kind of accent, whether that's an American accent, a British accent, Irish, Australian, Southern American, whatever it is. If you are not watching shows in that target accent, what are you doing? How are you supposed to practice your listening and pronunciation skills if you really want to improve your American accent? Watching a show like Peaky Blinders.
What is Peaky Blinders? Peaky Blinders. You don't know what that is? Irish? Irish.
Watching a show like Peaky Blinders, where they have very strong Irish and British accents, is not going to help you at all. So what are some things that you should consider when picking out shows to watch? If your goal is to improve your vocabulary, try to watch shows that are relatively recent. They don't have to have been filmed in only the past 5 or so years, but if they take place within the past 20 years or so, that should be fine. The vocabulary should be relatively up to date, and it will help with your daily conversation skills. If you want to keep watching your K-dramas, great. But just watch them with subtitles in your own native language. Please do not rely on media in other languages to help you with your English, because things get lost in translation and it's just a waste of your time. But I do understand that not all K-dramas have subtitles in every single language, so yes, use English if that's the only one available. And finally, if your goal is to hone in on a specific kind of accent, like an American, Australian, or British accent, just watch shows that were created in those specific countries. But you might want to do a bit of extra research into where those shows take place, because within English-speaking countries, there are so many different accents. If you want to practice an accent that is super specific to a region, do that little bit of extra research. If you want to sound like you're from Los Angeles, you could watch shows like The Kardashians because they have their Cali girl accents. If you want to sound like you're from New York City, there are plenty of shows that have New Yorker accents. If you want to sound like a cowboy, watch shows that take place in the South or on farms. By doing that extra little bit of research, you'll be able to find tons of different fun shows that will help you achieve the accent that you desire. The fourth thing that you're doing that is completely ruining your English learning progress is only relying on one study method. I've had tons of students and even people in my comment section with incorrect grammar say that they only rely on watching shows to practice their English. But how is that going to improve your writing, reading, or speaking? It won't. I've had lots of people tell me that they only use textbooks. That's not sufficient at all. But what about English teachers? If you only practice your English in an English lesson, guess what? Also, not sufficient. Only using one study method really limits your ability to learn. Now, watching shows is a great way to pick up on different vocabulary and maybe practice your pronunciation if you're doing mirroring practice. But unless you're doing those things, shows are not going to help you with your speaking. And they're not really going to help you with your reading skills. And they sure as heck will not help you with your writing skills, which we can see in my angry YouTube comments from people who insist that only shows are sufficient. Just saying. But why aren't textbooks enough to practice your English? Have you ever listened to a foreigner in your country speak your native language and thought, ooh, they sound a little bit like a robot? Have they never listened to how we actually speak? Native English speakers feel the same way when we hear people using what's called textbook English. Textbooks generally only teach formal English, which is not used in daily conversation. They only teach you very rigid rules and more formal vocabulary, which isn't always useful and probably will make you sound like a robot. And even though textbooks often have good ways to practice vocabulary and grammar, maybe some writing, they're really not useful for practicing pronunciation. I have shown countless examples of different phonetic pronunciations available in textbooks and even on Google that don't accurately portray how words are usually spoken. And what about us English teachers? We aren't English wizards. We can't just snap our fingers and make you fluent when our lessons are your only English exposure throughout the week. English teachers and tutors will do as much as we can during our lessons to help our students improve their English skills. But unless you're also absorbing English outside of the classroom, whether that's with passive learning or taking our advice for homework and study recommendations, only a few hours with an English teacher is not really going to help you improve your English skills. You need to trust your English teachers when we recommend all different ways to practice outside of the classroom. Let me give you an example of this from a student that I had a few years ago. So this student had moved to the United States a few years before our lesson started, but he felt like his English skills just weren't improving very much because he actually didn't use English very often, which is the case for a lot of people that move to the United States, surprisingly enough. So in our first lesson, I gave him a lot of recommendations for how to passively study because he was a busy dude with his work and kids. And he never took those recommendations. He never practiced his listening. He never watched shows that were in English. He never read anything. Whatever. That was his choice. But his English wasn't improving. And after a few weeks, he complained that his English wasn't improving, even though he wasn't taking my advice for passive studying. So he asked me for some real homework. He wanted some writing assignments. And I was like, okay, great. Here's what I want you to do. Read an Ingo article of your choice and answer the questions at the bottom of the page. Then we will review them next time. So when our next class came around, I eagerly asked him if we could review his writing. And he was like, I didn't do it. It was too easy, so I didn't want to. And I explained to him that the reading that I gave him was suitable for his level, but he didn't want to take my advice. He insisted on getting a more difficult homework assignment. So I assigned him a more difficult reading material and some more advanced questions. When our next class came around, I asked him, so, did you do the homework assignment? And he said, no, it was too hard, so I didn't do it. So I had given him all these different passive study recommendations, and he didn't do them. And I gave him a homework assignment that was suitable for his level, and he didn't do it. And then I gave him one that was more advanced than his level, which he had asked for, and he didn't do it. How was he supposed to improve if he didn't do anything? So if a teacher gives you specific recommendations, just know that it's because... Can you hear that? That's my neighbor's. That's his stereo shaking my house. So if your teacher gives you recommendations or specific homework assignments, you have to trust that they are suitable for your level and that they will be conducive to you improving your English. So what should you do when it comes to picking out a study method? Do a little bit of everything. You should be watching some shows to get in that listening and hopefully some mirroring and pronunciation practice. They're a great way to pick up new vocabulary. Textbooks are quite useful for studying vocabulary and grammar, and they can be nice to add some structure to your study routine. And obviously, English tutors and teachers are an excellent resource to help you improve your English because not only do we teach you things, we can also provide you with personalized feedback to help you fix any specific mistakes that you may be making, and we can tailor fit homework suggestions and study recommendations to fit your lifestyle. And the final thing that is destroying your English learning progress is you haven't found your why. What do I mean by finding your why? Well, that's figuring out the reason why you want to become proficient in English. Just saying, I want to be fluent in English isn't enough. That's not going to help motivate you and get you through the hard times along your English learning journey, because studying isn't always going to be easy. You're going to hit some rough patches. You're going to have some times where you plateau before you start improving again. If you just say, I want to be fluent, that's not useful. You're going to be more likely to quit or waste your time studying things that may be unnecessary. So what should you do? Take some time to do some deep introspection. Look into your heart and really try to figure out what is the specific reason why you want to improve your English, or what is a specific level of proficiency that you need to get to. Once you figure out your exact reason why, you can then shape your study routine around that goal so that you're studying in a way that aligns with what you want. So let's say you want to improve your English so that you can travel the world. Definitely skip out on practicing formal conversation, such as textbook English. And instead, you should really focus on practicing your daily conversation skills and pronunciation. Try integrating more travel-related content into your study routine, whether that's reading news articles about places that you want to go, or even watching travel documentaries or travel vlogs on YouTube. You'll be able to pick up on the vocabulary, and you can also do that mirroring practice like I recommended before. But what about if you're preparing for an English exam for university or a future job? Definitely pick up a textbook and focus on that formal academic English. It might not be as fun, but if your goal is to get a specific score on that English exam, you need to build a specific study routine focused on what is necessary in that exam. So not only will your textbooks come in clutch, try reading news articles related to social sciences or biological science, and maybe watch some nature or science related documentaries so you can also get in those listening skills. The National Geographic Channel would be a great resource for this. But a little side note on preparing for the TOEFL exam, even though I'm a TOEFL tutor, I will never recommend that someone take the TOEFL exam unless they really need it for school or work or whatever. If you just want to become fluent in English, practicing in a way that prepares you for a test is not the way to go, because that kind of formal English is not applicable to daily conversation. And one last why that I often hear from my students is that they want a job in an English-speaking country or a job that requires a certain level of English proficiency. So in these cases, daily conversation is very useful to learn because you're going to have a lot of office small talk. You also definitely need to study vocabulary related to your field. So you can do this by reading articles related to your field of work, or One thing that I recommend a lot of my students do, just for picking up vocabulary, is actually to look at LinkedIn job postings in your field, because they definitely have the vocab that's required for that career. So it's time to be honest with yourself. Have you ever made any of these mistakes along your English learning journey? Or are you maybe making a few of them right now? Comment below any mistakes you've made along your English journey and what you did to correct them, or what you plan on doing to correct them. And if you'd like even more resources to improve your English, check out my free weekly study planner, which is full of tips and tricks for how to incorporate English into your daily routine. And check out the playlist right over here for even more tips to help you along your English learning journey. Happy studying, and I'll see you later.